Welcome to episode 208 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Doug Fisher of Fisher Frey and Hattie about the best practices from their Distance Learning Playbook and the practical takeaways from the experiences of more than 70 teachers that they learned through their research. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript, or find our Truth for Teachers podcast community on Facebook. It's so essential right now to prioritize your self-care in order to avoid burnout and compassion fatigue. The Jabu Mind app is the only mindfulness app specifically designed for school teachers. Using the research-based iRest method, the app features daily mindfulness exercises, and all premium content is free through the pandemic. You have given and continue to give, and now it's time to receive. Download the Jabu Mind app today in the App Store or on Google Play. It's Jabu Mind, Jabu Mind app. Also, if student engagement and participation have been a struggle recently with remote learning, I'd like to recommend some practical strategies that could help. My friend, teacher, author, and speaker, Dr. John Spencer, you know him from the Creative Classroom podcast, right? He has a fantastic online course for K-12 teachers called Empowering Students in Distance Learning Classes. John shares ways to have kids self-select scaffolds and use choice menus, engage in creative projects, and self-assess. There's a practical video with specific strategies for each method of engagement, with guided steps to help you create something meaningful that you'll actually use in your distance learning classroom. The course is on demand and you have forever access. Visit my affiliate link in the show notes for a special offer. So I'm talking today with Doug Fisher of Fisher & Frey about the most important ideas from their new book with John Hattie called The Distance Learning Playbook, K-12 Teaching for Engagement and Impact in Any Setting. The book is based on the classroom experiences of a diverse group of more than 70 teachers this past spring. I asked Doug to sum up their most important takeaways, the things that surprised him, and the best practical ideas that came out of these teachers' experiences. If you need to hear a positive outlook and some inspiration about distance or hybrid learning right now, I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. Listen in. Doug, you collaborated with a diverse group of more than 70 educators to compile some emerging best practices that they uncovered this spring. And we're going to use the lessons learned from their experiences as the basis of our conversation here today. So can you tell us about who these educators are and some common themes and the takeaways that they shared with you?
Sure. So the 74 amazing educators from preschool all the way up through chemistry allowed us from Australia, Hawaii, Alaska, California, Texas, allowed us, Nancy and I, to peer into their classes and process and coach and plan and design. And at the beginning, it was rough going into distance learning. And I'm not even sure I would actually call it distance learning. I think it was more crisis teaching, where we're grabbing anything we can to have stuff for students to do. And over time, as we processed and they experimented and they allowed us to think, we started seeing trends emerge and themes emerge, and eventually an instructional framework emerged that seemed to really work to get students to engage in learning tasks from a distance.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to diving into some of those best practices. I feel like there's so many different scenarios happening right now. So trying to figure out the logistics is really, really tricky for teachers. And I know that one of the things that was really a struggle was student engagement and work completion. So trying to get the kids to show up to the lessons and then actually completing the work. So I'm wondering if you can share some strategies maybe that elementary teachers have used, and then talk about some secondary strategies for helping kids focus and get their work completed when we're doing distance learning.
Yeah, really interesting. So yes, in the beginning, we weren't seeing all the students come in. They weren't sure what they were supposed to do. So I think part of it was a lack of clarity. We have to make sure we're communicating with students and their families about when they need to be on, what they need to be doing, the teacher clarity stuff. Like, we know we have to design lessons that are clear, that have clear learning intentions, clear areas to make success. And then we have to make sure that there's tasks that students can engage in and feel good about it. We know that success is motivating. When you do something and you feel good about it, you want to do it again. We were exploring these ideas of motivation and engagement, and we ran across a series of studies that John Hattie had found and one of his students was working on. And there's this model of engagement that moves from participating up to driving, and it's a continuum. And a low level of engagement is when you just participate in things. And I think that's where we were in the beginning of this pandemic. We were asking kids to participate. But if you move to higher levels of engagement, it's where they drive, where they set their goals, they monitor their progress, they reflect on what they've been learning. And yes, 5-year-olds can do this. There was this awesome lesson we watched about punctuation, which seems kind of not that exciting. But these first graders were learning about punctuation, and they were writing, and they were deciding, and they were creating, and they were driving the learning. The teacher was supporting them with the punctuation, and they were engaged, and they were talking to each other, and they were comparing, like, no, I think that should be an exclamation mark, it's more exciting, and but you asked a question, and they were just, it was so interesting to watch, and they really didn't want to end the session with their teacher when their time was up. Another example uh, of a foods class, the family and consumer sciences nutrition class. The school decided to deliver the food to students' homes rather than have it at school, because obviously the kids couldn't come to school to do their cooking, which is part of the class for nutrition and family and consumer sciences. So the students got food delivered. And on Tuesdays, they would do a participating lesson where the teacher would model on video, live, and they would follow along. But then Wednesday and Thursday, they had to innovate and take recipes and create things, and they had to document that. But then they had to get feedback from their family and document that, and then reflect on how their family liked the food or didn't like the food and what they would do next time. And you watch over 6 weeks the change in these students' perceptions. Like, it matters what other people think. I'm going to make adjustments in how I do these things because of my parents or my siblings or my grandma or whoever was watching. They still learn nutrition. They still learned all about fats and carbohydrates and proteins and all this stuff and minerals and everything else the teacher wanted them to learn. But they became the drivers. And they were seeking out feedback from other people, not just their teacher. And they were making adjustments in their learning because of the experience.
Can you tell me about the tools that were used for this? So if we go back to the first grade punctuation lesson, what tech tools were being used to have that kind of engagement?
Awesome. So in that case, it was a Zoom meeting, and they were sharing the whiteboard, and the teacher had shared the whiteboard, and the students were saying the sentences, and much like shared writing, they were sharing it and writing together and then talking about it. In this case, the students did go to breakout rooms for 2 minutes with a partner to share a sentence and the correct punctuation, and then she brought them back to whole group, sharing the whiteboard again. It was just really interesting. Even her background that she had for Zoom was a whole bunch of punctuation behind her. And she would say to them, so is it the one on my right or is it the one on my left? And there was a question and exclamation mark, and there were periods and commas. It was so cool to watch them. And then they got to do the little voting thing, the reaction buttons, and they were there with her. They were right there with her in that. The high school example was on the Teams meeting. And so they were having a Teams meeting to do the demonstration. And then they did Flipgrid as the way to document their process, like how they cooked, and the feedback from their family.
How about relationship and community building? Because I know this past spring we had the benefit of having had those face-to-face interactions for many months before
Yeah.
teachers and students were going remote. And I know that teachers this year are really worried about how they're going to develop trust when they're not teaching in person. So are there any specific things that the teachers in your city did that really helped with community building, or things that you would recommend for that?
Yeah, and that you're right. We had the benefit of already knowing the kids. We closed schools in San Diego on March 13th. We already knew those kids. We had relationships, and we traded on those relationships to keep them coming. So I've been very worried about this, but there's several districts in California that offered an extended summer school with teachers that the students had not physically met before. And so in one district, 98% of the kids said they trusted their teacher, they enjoyed their teacher, and they would like to have another learning experience with that teacher. So I think it's possible to really establish these relationships. Now, some of the things they did, They did some personal stuff. They got to know the kids. They did something called banking time. And there's a fair amount of research on banking time. It's like a 10-minute student-directed one-on-one interaction. And you get to, deposit, if you will, some time with a kid so that there's a relationship that starts to build. And there's been research on banking time for years. They did that. They made sure they used the students' names. They greeted them when they entered. They used their names during the sessions on a regular basis. They asked questions about, emotional check-in kinds of questions. They let the students have a little bit of peer talk time. I remember one of the sessions I was in, one of the students, a fourth grader, says, he said his teacher's name, "Could we have a couple minutes to just talk to our friends like a break?" And she said, "Yes, of course." And they had a little break, and and they're laughing and they're talking, and we forget that. I mean, that's natural at school. When we have a transition, we get to say something to a friend, or we have passing periods or recess. And so let's not forget that. We're social beings. So I was lamenting this idea of, relationships and how would we develop in the fall. And so those school districts that ran summer school were comforting to me. But I was talking about this not too long ago, and someone sent me a direct message on Twitter and said, "You got to stop saying that relationships are going to be a problem in the fall." And I wrote her back and said, "Why is that?" And she wrote me back and said, "I've been married to my husband for 20 years. The first year of our relationships was from a distance. Totally. Human beings know how to develop relationships, and sometimes they develop from a distance." And that was comforting to me because I had forgotten how many people develop friendships and relationships from a distance.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Doug, because I was thinking the same thing as you were talking. I'm thinking about examples from my own life, and friends that I have that I really, don't spend a lot of time with in person. We live in different areas of the country, and I've connected with them virtually. We have shared interests in the education space, and our whole relationship is online. And I have
Mm-hmm.
also heard from many teachers who have said, building relationships with kids in distance learning is really not a problem once you understand how to do it. It's really not a hindrance at all. It's
Yeah.
actually a really fantastic way to connect. And I think that's an optimistic viewpoint and a positive viewpoint that I think is a really good counter narrative to a lot of the struggles that we're having, because I'm not saying it's going to be easy for everyone and that it's going to work in every situation, but
Right.
I think you're right that we do need to stop necessarily starting with the assumption that relationships are somehow weakened when you're doing it through a device, when in many ways we can actually have stronger relationships with students.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think we have to bring everything we know. So I asked a group of teachers, I was doing a session with them a couple days ago, and I said, "What do you do on the first day of school?" And they put in the chat like a list of all the things they do. And I read the chat and I said, "The only thing I saw that you could not do is give hugs. Everything else in the
Mm,
chat you could do online. Every single other strategy you listed." We didn't forget how to be teachers. We have to learn some tech tools.
right.
We have to think about it. Like when we're in a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting or a Google Meets meeting or whatever, we still need to gesture. We need to make eye contact. We need to kind of move our bodies a little bit. I am seeing, at the beginning, we were seeing some people like sit super still and stare at the camera, and that's not natural for us. We move, we talk, we move our hands. We have to do all of that. We have to do all the same things that we did. And we need to be there for students. We need to listen to them. We need to make eye contact with them. We need to honor their voice and the gratitude. Thanks for being here today. We started at the high school level. At the end of a Zoom meeting, there was a poll question, an anonymous poll question of how effective was today's lesson? What could I do to improve? So there's this, they could tap in the chat to improve, but they had to rate. And we started seeing trends like they want to be asked for feedback. And we forgot that at the beginning. Like, how effective was
Mhm.
today? So we can reflect on it. And we should do that. We should think about that.
Right. And all of these things require intentionality, whether you're online or face to face, because it's not like differentiation or individualization or making these one on one connections was so easy in person learning. I mean, I know
Right.
that for me as a classroom teacher, getting that one on one time with kids was so hard because I had the whole rest of the class sitting there, waiting for me to finish with that child. They were working on something, but you can't give a whole lot of one-on-one attention sometimes when you have the entire class in the room with you. And that's kind of one of the benefits that I've heard from some teachers that they were able to
Mhm.
really maximize with remote learning, is that with more asynchronous learning and with these different tech tools, it's actually easier in some cases to have that one-on-one connection, because you don't have the rest of the class sitting there depending on you to kind of keep things moving. You're not, sort of, on stage or managing a room with lots of different kids at one time. You can actually have more individual connections.
Exactly. I'll tell you an example of this banking time idea. It was a third grade class, and the teacher would have one kid come 10 minutes before the official Zoom time, and then one kid stay after. Just so 2 kids a day. And I remember one of them, I had permission to listen in from the parents. And one of them, she said, "So what would you like to teach me today?" to this third grader. And he says, "Do you know Fortnite?"
Mm.
And she said, "I've heard of it, but I don't really understand it." He said, "Well, can I show you?" And she says, "Sure. Do you want to share your screen?" And he goes, "Yes." And so she changed the controls so he could share this screen. And he does this awesome little lesson about Fortnite for his teacher. And I just watched his face change. He's now, I mean, it's 10 minutes. He's now teaching her, he's developing a relationship with her in a different way. And there was some, like, oh, we're connected now. And you watched him in the rest of the lesson. He was a different kid that day. He was attentive and he was participating and he was adding things to the chat. It was just really interesting how that one-on-one time, that which, as you said, would be very difficult to do. It's occurring before school, after school, lunch. Yes, teachers do that, but it's hard to do. In this venue, we can do that. We can have some whole group sessions. We can have some small group sessions. We can get kids working independently. We can then meet with individual kids or groups of kids. There's a lot of flexibility in the use of time in this situation right now.
Yes, and those are the moments that teachers live for. I mean, that's why you get into the profession. And I think being able to make those connections and have those real moments, with kids are just so powerful. So it's inspiring to refocus on that and remember that that can happen.
Hmm.
Was there anything that these 70 teachers that you work with, is there anything they discovered during crisis distance learning that really surprised you or that really surprised them?
Uh, well, the honest part of that is not they didn't all take care of themselves, and we need to remind people you got to take care of yourself. Yeah, one of my friends says to pay attention to the flight attendants, put your own oxygen mask on first. I'll say, you can't fill another cup if yours is empty. We have to take care of ourselves. We need routines, morning routine, end of work routine. We need to schedule breaks for ourselves. So we got to take care of ourselves. And some people were working, heroically to make sure kids were learning. And I appreciate that. It's not sustainable. We do need to take care of ourselves. That was one of my big aha moments was, wow, we got to encourage people to take care of themselves. So in the distance learning playbook, the very first module is take care of yourself for that exact reason. The other thing that kind of surprised me
Right.
here was the that a lot of our instructional frameworks that we use in physical school when instruction is time bound didn't really work, and people were trying to take their structures, their instructional structures from physical school and apply them to distance learning, and it just wasn't working. And over several weeks, we started noticing there were these like 4 moves that teachers made, and they seemed to work better in distance formats. One was demonstrating, often done on a video. So you could do a direct instruction or a think aloud or a worked example, and you could demonstrate for kids, and they could watch it over and over again. And that's one of the ahas. If you're doing teacher modeling, physical school, the kids cannot rewind you when they don't understand. But in this venue, if a parent and a kid are struggling, they can watch it again. If the student wants to watch it again, they can. The second area is around collaborating, which I think a lot of us forgot in the beginning of this. The value of student to student interaction, using academic language, agreeing and disagreeing, coming to terms, reaching consensus, all that is still super important. The third move is around coaching and facilitating, like when you notice errors and mistakes and how you support a learner without telling them the answer. And the last is practice. And I'll hit on that for just a minute. I go to a lot of education conferences, or I did when we were allowed to travel. I went to a lot of education conferences, and it's all about instruction. And I think we forget it's important to get students to practice. In fact, they probably have to over practice to learn things, and it has to be deliberate. It can't be boring or uninspired. But practice is super important, and I think this is providing us a venue to get that deliberate, spaced practice, because we can give students things to do for the next 30 minutes in their home and then bring them back together and then send them back. I'm seeing a lot more teachers now say, I want you to go do this, independent test. I want you to go write this paragraph or whatever. Take your eyes away from the screen. Go do that. Don't log out. Come back to me when the timer's up. So I'm seeing some real innovations in those 4 areas that these choices teachers have to demonstrate, get kids to collaborate, coach and facilitate, and then get them to practice. And I think that framework that's not time dependent was easier to plan from.
Yes, I agree. And I know there's a huge range of expectations for teachers and kids when it comes to remote learning in terms of how much time is spent on synchronous learning and how much is done asynchronously. What do
Mhm.
you recommend as a best practice based on teacher experiences past spring as well as research?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the age of the kids. We're somewhere 2.5 or 3 hours synchronous a day, not consecutively. But that's about, parents are looking for that as well. Parents are asking for more time with the teacher, with their kid. I think some more small group instruction is going to be important. So I would say, at the elementary level, if we could go on in the morning, an hour or so, give them to do some things, do some small group, bring them back in, do some more, get them to do their learning management systems, their independent practice, and then bring them back again. So I would say 2.5 or 3 hours for elementary school, I think would be really strong. Less than that, I mean, we were seeing some times in the beginning of this, it was like 30 minutes a day. The kids were not connecting. They blew off most of the tasks they were asked to do. Their parents were super frustrated. I also want to be careful about how many consecutive hours we ask kids to do. I think the breaks in there are important, and I think we need to incorporate movement in their breaks. Get them out of the chairs, get them to do something, and then come back into there. I think we should also have change their eye field. So like you're only staring at the screen for so long, then you do something else, and then you come back to the screen. So in general, the synchronous time, probably for fall, we're looking around 2.5 or 3 hours for elementary kids spread across the day.
And what about for secondary?
The schedules are really interesting here. So the people are doing, some people are doing A/B days. So you take half your classes one day, half the classes your other day. So what you're seeing is around 4 hours in the high school. Many schools are going to the quarter system and doing longer blocks of time with fewer classes. That was another parent request in some of the national surveys that I've been reading. Is it's very difficult to have 6 classes or 7 classes a day, uh, all distance learning, because they're
Hmm.
logging in, logging out, logging in, logging out. And so you're seeing a trend to go to quarter system, or you're seeing a trend to go to A/B days. So on A day, you take these 3 classes. On B day, you take these classes. And so some innovation there. I think for the high schoolers also, there's some possibility of asynchronous, deep learning with them, the tasks. Like we are enamored with Edpuzzle and Play Posit. You import a video and it asks quiz questions throughout the video, and the video won't play till you answer the question. We said it that you could
Nice.
do it over again. This is really meaningful learning. And if you're thoughtful as a teacher and you've recorded information and you have PowerPoint and stuff, and you pause 4 or 5 times and ask them questions, and if you said it, if the answer is wrong, it backs up the video and plays it again. So you can hear the information a second time and then answer the question again. That's meaningful learning. It does not have to be synchronous to do that.
That's Ed Puzzle that you're referring to that does that, right?
Edpuzzle and PlayPosit are the 2 tools that we're seeing used most frequently for that.
That's awesome. What would you recommend that teachers do if their administrators or their district leaders are mandating more synchronous learning that is manageable or beneficial, or asking them to do things that they know really aren't best for kids?
I think that's always going to be, we have to negotiate. We have to say, what does the evidence say? We do not have a lot of evidence, from pandemic. We can draw on previous studies around distance learning, but that was not large scale. People tried it. So I think it has to be negotiated. I think we also need to look at local context with families, how much time kids can sustain this, are parents in the home or not. But if it's really, really unreasonable, there are mechanisms teachers have to renegotiate their agreements with the school system. I think all of us are at a place of saying, what can we do that is the best, given that the world is in a pandemic? How do we make sure kids are still learning, and what is meaningful? So I think one of the places where you're seeing more requests for synchronous is when there's not really good asynchronous things for them to do. And when you get something like a play pause it, or you get something like read alouds recorded. So at our school, I work at a high school. At our school, we are recording. We have a pathway of kids who want to be future teachers. Well, they can't do their internships now. They're not allowed to go to elementary schools, and no one's there anyway. So part of their pathway is to record read alouds and shared readings in English and Spanish and load them into the portal for teachers to download. And so if you're a first grade teacher and there are 25 read alouds, you can choose which ones you're going to download. That's a meaningful task that doesn't have to be done synchronously, because the kids will watch it. And I'm thinking that some of these first graders and second graders or whatever are going to have, they're going to have fans of these high schoolers, their personalities, and like, I want to watch Jorge again because Jorge is really funny when he reads, So that's what I'm thinking about. Like, we could super innovate on this. I think the other thing that's starting to happen is teams are coming together. So this first grade team I've been watching, one of them took all the phonics lessons, all of the spelling lessons, and all of the writing lessons. Another person took all of the reading, like the read alouds and the modeling and all that. Another took all of the math, and they recorded videos and they shared them with each other. And so they provided this whole bank of resource to the entire first grade families. It didn't matter which teacher you had for the live sessions, you still had this huge bank of resources for kids. And they essentially created a playlist of things for children and their families. There's some really meaningful things that we can do in that venue in an asynchronous way. But that took time. So teachers need some of the time to create those assets as well. So we have to think about in a teacher's workday, where is the time to create the assets versus where's the time to be live with kids? I do think we should be seeing students, face to face, live, not physically, synchronous every single day. That we need to be looking at their faces, looking at their eyes, checking in with them, providing experiences, providing social emotional support every single day.
Now, let me ask you about an equity piece there, because I know that a lot of teachers and students have expressed concern over being required to turn on their camera for video. They don't, they're self-conscious about their appearance, about their home background, about what's happening behind them. What would you say to that?
There was a really interesting set of articles that came out around this topic. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of students that are really self-conscious and not really wanting to look at themselves all day long. And they're not used to looking at themselves. And when they do post pictures of themselves, they have filters on, they use Snapchat, they change the photos, but they're not used to looking at themselves, and they're super self-conscious. And so they tried this intervention where they taught them to turn off the self view, which is possible to turn off the self view. And all of a sudden camera use went way up because they didn't have to look at themselves. So there are ways to do that. Now, we do recommend that kids find a place where there's a flat background so people are not going to walk behind them. They can even hang something up so we can't see behind them. So we've gone through some guidelines of that. But we don't require, at our school, we don't require camera use. We encourage it. As a teacher, we are able to look at their faces and see if they're understanding, if they're tracking, if they have questions. When they don't have their camera on, we don't know that. So I think we have to encourage it, and we have to provide support. So we recognize now that there are many young people who are self-conscious and don't want to be looking at themselves all day long. So there are tools we can address that. If they don't want us looking in their house. So I had a ninth grader that carved a place out in his own closet in his bedroom. And I don't really recommend kids do their meetings in their bedroom, and I have a whole philosophy about that. But he carved out a place in his bedroom. He hung this whole almost like a shower curtain thing around, and he's put a stool in there, and that's where he did school. It was quiet for him in a very busy house. No one could see anything else. No one would walk behind him, and he could do school there. And it really worked for him. So I think that's what we have to encourage. As we get to know our students, we have to talk to them individually and get to know them. Is there a place that you're comfortable? How can I support you? There's a bunch of elementary kids. This innovation came out in the Midwest, that the parents were encouraged to build little forts out of blankets somewhere in their house. And that's where the kid would go to school and put the headphones on with your laptop inside your fort, so that when you were in there, that was school and your behavior was appropriate for that environment. And then when you're out and you're playing in the house and that kind of stuff, I think that's really cool. I think we're seeing all kinds of innovations in this.
What about hybrid learning? Are there any best practices for that when we have kids learning from home, let's say 2 to 3 days a week, and then coming into class the rest of the week?
Yeah. So if we have the pleasure of having students with us, I think we should be very careful about how we use those precious minutes. I think collaboration is going to be really important. Getting kids to talk to each other and interact, yes, 6 feet apart, but that's going to be important. Also, looking at the patterns of errors and reteaching while we're live with them when we can see them is going to be important. At this point, if you get limited amount of time physically with kids, I would not do things like teacher modeling and direct instruction and that kind of stuff, or have them practice. That stuff should happen on the days when they're home. They can watch the video 3 times of you modeling. They can engage in the practice. They can you can analyze the patterns of error. And, that's not what I would prioritize physically in the classroom. I would prioritize getting kids to interact with one another, looking at the errors, reteaching while they're there physically with you.
So does this require then for a teacher to be running 2 lesson plans for every day, like an A lesson plan and a B lesson plan? So there's one thing for in class, one thing for at home, and then the kids are switching?
Yes. Yep. So I think if you have an A-B schedule, and that's becoming a popular model, so some kids come on A day, some kids come on B day, I think one group should always be a day behind, so you don't have to double plan. So, you teach the A while the B is doing practice from the day before, and then you teach the B same things the A got. So they're always just one day behind. I think so you're not having to double plan all the time.
Mhm. What's something that you're optimistic about for the coming school year?
So I think there's all this talk about the deficits and the loss of learning and all this stuff. And I think that's a really dangerous path to head down. It's very deficit oriented, and it can lead to labeling and all this stuff. So I don't want to deny that some kids didn't get a full year of school, but summer, we take 3 months off in the summer in the US, so they're not learning that time either. So, and there's summer loss, we get it. But what if we said, what do they absolutely need to learn? And focus on that. There's evidence, Graham Nuthall, for example's book, Hidden Life of Learners, there's evidence that between 40 and 60% of minutes in physical school are spent on things kids already have learned. And so if we cut that out, that 40 to 60% of the minutes stuff they already learned, and we really focus on what they learned, what they really need to learn right now, we could make a huge difference in their learning lives.
I want to close out with a takeaway truth. What is something that you wish that every teacher understood about distance learning?
I wish you recognized that you didn't forget how to teach. The same things, maybe not all the instructional moves, but the same passion, the same engagement, the same relationships, all of that you already know how to do. What we have to learn is a few tech tools so that we can accomplish the teaching moves that we want. But we did not forget how to teach. And it's possible. Maybe it's not what we all wanted. I did not sign up to be this distance teacher. I signed up to be around kids in a building, around teachers and colleagues and things like that. But right now, our kids need us. We're still a school. We still have a job to do. Together, we will get through this pandemic, and we will be better as a result when we come back.